Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff, and this is launch day for the OnePlus 7 and the OnePlus 7 Pro. Now what I have right here is the OnePlus 7 Pro, and I've been using it for the past week as my daily driver, so I want to talk about my experience over the past week with this guy. I've been really enjoying it, so let's get into it. Now the first thing I want to talk about here is the appearance of this phone. This is beautiful, and I love using this. So this one here is the Nebula Blue. We also have an almond color and a mirror gray. Just look at how the light catches that. So at first it's kind of a dark blue color, a little bit of a matte appearance to it. And then when you turn it and it catches the light, it turns this really brilliant blue. It's completely gorgeous. I really appreciate how the camera setup looks on the back. It's not cumbersome, weird looking, or in the way. I'm also really enjoying this blue frame that we have, and then when it wraps around, you can see that it goes from blue to black. Although it may be a dark blue, in some lightings it looks black. It's just stunning looking from the back all around. And then when you turn it to the front, you've got this completely immersive, huge 6.67-inch display. Now, when accounting for the corners, it's actually 6.46 inches. But you'll notice that there is no notch here. This is the first phone that I'm playing with that's notchless in this full screen fashion. And it makes me wonder how I'm even going to go back to using a phone right now that has a notch. Now we've also got a nice gentle sloping curve to it, and it actually hasn't bothered me at all because it is such a gentle curve. In real use, I'm not really seeing much reflection. I can see it here just by how my lights are placed, but I'm not minding the curve at all. Now this phone is protected with Gorilla Glass 5. I believe that is both the front and the back. And what I really appreciate with this phone is I can get it all smudgy and fingerprinty, but those fingerprints come off very, very easily. It definitely looks matte, but it's not like the Pixel 3 where if you touch it, it gets completely smudgy and forget about ever getting fingerprints off of it. Not a problem. Now looking around this phone a little bit, starting from the bottom, we've got the SIM tray, which is a dual SIM phone. It doesn't have an SD card slot though, so what storage this has on board is what it's got. We've got two microphones, we've got our charging port here, USB-C, we've got a speaker here, which reminds me that we have another speaker up here, so this is a stereo speaker phone. I am extremely happy about that. And now on the side here we have the notification switch just as before. We've got our power button. Here we've got the volume rocker. At the top here, we've got another microphone, and also here is the camera, which we're going to talk about, the front-facing camera. 3 cameras on the back, and also our LED flash, dual LED flash. Now, as far as water resistancy, it doesn't have an IP rating, although it's probably somewhat resistant to water. I'm sure somebody will test that out. And the last thing to mention is that we do not have a headphone jack. And there isn't a headset included in the box, so you'll have to get your own wireless headset. Moving on. Let's start off talking about my user experience with this display. This is an incredible display. As I mentioned before, this is 6.46 inches or 6.67 inches if you are not counting the rounded corners. So this is a quad HD screen, the first that I've seen from OnePlus. It's got to be no doubt a Samsung panel. So of course it's OLED, it's 516 pixels per inch, it's a 19.5 by 9 aspect ratio. They call this Fluid AMOLED, and the reason for that is that it's running at 90 hertz, so 90 frames per second, and it is smooth. So underneath screen settings, you can see we've got the option for screen refresh rate. It's between 90 hertz and 60 hertz, and there really is a difference when you go back down to that 60 hertz. I don't like it anymore. I don't want to go at 60 hertz. They say that it can improve battery life being at 60 hertz, but I don't care. That nice smooth experience means more to me. So I mostly notice the difference while scrolling around the interface, such as with menus or when going into apps that you are scrolling in. It's butter. It just feels very, very responsive. And then, of course, something else to talk about with this display is the screen calibration, and it does not disappoint. You've got many modes here. You've got Vivid, you've got Natural, which is your sRGB mode, and then you've got Advanced, where you can choose the full gamut of the display, the sRGB mode, and Display P3, and of course, you can mess around with the color temperature to your heart's content. Now, I measured the natural mode, the sRGB mode, and most consumer content in general is sRGB, so you want to have it set to the mode that matches the content so that it looks right. And it's a very well calibrated sRGB mode. So the coordinate points definitely match the sRGB color space. The gamma is really nice. It's not really high, so the screen just looks right contrast-wise. High gamma makes things look darker and more saturated, so it's definitely not something that you want. The color temperature is ever so slightly on the warm side, but it's not offensive at all. And of course, you have the ability to mess with that anyway, underneath the advanced mode. So I am very, very pleased. I also did some brightness measurements of this display, so if you have it on 100% brightness manually, it gives you around 400 nits. Now when I turned it on auto brightness and forced that brightness to go higher, I was only hitting around that 555 nit mark, where the Galaxy S10 Plus can really overpower it at 800 nits easily. So that's to say that in direct sunlight, the Galaxy S10 Plus is a lot brighter, it's easier to see. But in most situations, this is perfectly fine. I bet you OnePlus could drive the display brighter, but they don't. I don't know why. Now, my favorite thing about this display has got to be that there is no notch. It's a completely immersive experience, and what makes this possible is the camera setup. This isn't the only phone to have this particular camera setup, but it's the first one that I've seen. And having that camera inset in the body has been very interesting. So if I just press here to bring it to the front. Hello! So you can see that it's got a motor in it that pushes the camera up and pulls it back down again. And it's pretty quick. Now the stats on this thing is that they've tested this out 300,000 times and it's been just fine. So that's 150 times a day for 5 years. It's going to be just fine. And it's also got some protection in that if you drop the phone, it senses that it's not in an upward orientation anymore and it will quickly shut the camera so it doesn't hit the ground. And it's screaming at me, of course, to protect front camera, please avoid pressing it manually. All right, then. So now let's talk a little bit about the specs and the performance of this front-facing camera. This is a 16-megapixel camera, f2.0 aperture. It's got electronic image stabilization, no optical image stabilization, and it also doesn't have autofocus, which has been a bummer to me because I've really come to love the front-facing camera on the Galaxy S10 and S10e. It's meant a lot to me to have autofocus with the front camera, so I don't have to worry about if I'm in focus or not, or how far away or how close I'm holding it. Now, another thing I noticed with having the camera situated right here is it's made it kind of awkward to compose a shot. I'm very much used to having my camera be right here. So when shooting images on the sky, I've found it kind of weird to hold it in portrait mode. I end up holding it in landscape, holding my arm outward, and then composing the shot that way. I find that the image looks a lot better. It's not given the opportunity to distort my face. Now, as for the quality itself, it's been pretty good. It really just depends on the environment. It's got decent HDR, although not perfect. It's an okay little front camera. You do have options with this front camera to do the portrait mode, though, which is really nice, and it's all done by computation. So now let's move on to talking about the setup of the cameras on the back. You can see we've got 3 cameras versus the 2 that we had on the OnePlus 6T. And the interesting thing now, and what I'm really appreciative of, is that these are all active cameras, where the top camera here was not one you could actually use. It was an aided camera. It would aid the main camera. So it was used for a depth sensor and adding extra detail or helping details for this main camera. Where this one has usable cameras galore. We've got the main camera, we've got a telephoto camera, and a wide-angle camera. This is 117 degrees. It's not as wide as the 123 degrees that we have on the Galaxy S10 series, but it gets the job done, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So what we have here with this main camera is a 48-megapixel sensor. Now you can shoot at 48 megapixels underneath the Pro mode, but just in the standard mode, what it's going to do is combine 4 pixels together at a time to create a 12-megapixel output. And they say combining those 4 pixels creates a 1.6 micron pixel, and the idea is to capture more light. Now I don't shoot at 48 megapixels. I didn't really see all that much of a benefit side by side with the 12 megapixel output. So it's cool that you can do that, but it's not something I use. So the aperture on this guy is f1.6. We've got optical image stabilization and electronic image stabilization. Now what I notice is that it does the same as what we've seen before with the OnePlus 6, is that 4K at 30 frames per second and also 1080p at 30 frames per second are going to use electronic image stabilization only. They don't use optical image stabilization. If you want to use optical image stabilization, use the 60 frame per second modes, such as 1080p 60 and 4K 60. Especially when you start filming outside in the shade, use the 60 frame per second modes because the image starts to break down pretty quickly with a lot of movement. So that's just something to note. Another thing to note is that with 4K, we have a time limit. It's 5 minutes for 4K at 60 frames per second, and it is 10 minutes at 4K 30. I know a lot of people ask about that, so there you go. Now, I've been pretty pleased overall with the main camera's images so far. I really like that they don't go crazy with the sharpening that Samsung does. I noticed compared to the Galaxy S10 that you don't have as much detail in shadows. So I'm going to take more time to shoot with it. So far, I am pleased. Ironically, what I've been most pleased with is this telephoto camera. This is a 78mm camera, 8 megapixels. It's got optical image stabilization. It's f2.4 aperture. It's got 1 micron pixels. And I think that this one, ironically, takes the best pictures. I don't know what it is with these OEMs and doing post-processing on the image to where it just looks kind of watercolory, but this one is not afraid of grain. There's so much nuance to the photos that this shoots. I find myself running around composing things just to shoot with this camera. These pictures have got plenty of detail. Really very pleased. I hope they don't do anything to change the way that this looks. It's stinking amazing. And then the last camera that we have on the back is this wide-angle camera, 117 degrees. And honestly, I really haven't been so impressed with it. It kind of feels like an afterthought. Seeing that the camera on the Galaxy S10 is wider and just appears to take better pictures overall just kind of leaves me with a poor taste in my mouth. Although this is a cheaper phone, and I feel like they're losing out in the camera department, really. That still seems to be their crux, OnePlus. I noticed that it doesn't take particularly sharp images, and there really isn't a lot of dynamic range to speak of. Honestly, if I'm going for a wide-angle photo, I'm just going to go into the camera, go underneath panorama mode, and use the main camera. It takes a better result. As far as specs on the ultra-wide camera, it's 16 megapixels, f2.2 aperture, and of course, as I mentioned, it's 117 degrees. But overall, it's meh. Now, this phone hasn't even been truly released yet, so I'll be looking for updates and seeing if there are improvements. I look forward to that. Now, taking just a little bit of a peek underneath this camera drawer, we've got video, we've got photo, portrait, so this does have a really nice portrait mode, at least for my testing so far. It's using the telephoto camera, and probably one of these other cameras for some depth information. We've got nightscape to take a little bit of better quality photos in the dark. We've got the pro mode, which is pretty fully functioning. You can see that we even have the option to shoot in RAW. And here's this deciding to shoot in 48 megapixels, should you want to take advantage of the full resolution of the sensor, although I really don't see an advantage to it. We've got a time-lapse mode, panorama, and slow motion. So you can shoot at 1080p at 240 frames per second, or 720p at 480 frames per second. Moving on to the stereo speakers, we've got the one coming through the receiver area and then the one that's here at the bottom. And these are Dolby Atmos speakers, and you can change the setting as you like. Dynamic, optimize the sound automatically based on your content for the best possible experience. Movie and music. And as far as these speakers sound, I like them. Honestly, when comparing it to the Galaxy S10 Plus so far, I've been favoring the speakers on this guy. Now, what I've been quite pleased with is the improvement of this optical fingerprint sensor that's on the front here. It works really well and is very, very fast. Now, it's not like the Galaxy S10 where I can just touch right here while the screen is off and it recognizes and turns on. So you can see the screen is off right here, and if I touch, it's not going to recognize my fingerprint. I need to make sure that I've got lift to wake on or tap to wake, and then it'll work. Honestly, that's okay with me because I can always see where this is located. I don't have to fish around for it. What I noticed between the Galaxy S10 is that I'm a lot more successful with unlocking the first time when touching the screen on the OnePlus 7 Pro. I'm not really sure why. This is an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor. I'm supposed to just barely touch it. But I feel like I have to be a little bit more accurate and careful about where I touch it and how long I'm placing my finger on it. If I place my finger on the screen for too long, it takes longer to unlock. If I place my finger on there too short, it's going to complain. So I feel like OnePlus's option just makes me a lot happier. So they say it's got a 3-element plastic lens. It's a larger sensor now, and they've got new algorithms in place. And as long as I'm somewhere around it, it's going to unlock. Now over the OnePlus 6T, we've got a larger battery. This is a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, and so far it's lasted me just fine through the day. I've got 6 hours of on-screen time. The new charging standard is called Warp Charge 30. It's a 30-watt charger instead of the 20-watt charger that we used to have, and it charges really fast. They claim an all-day charge in 20 minutes. So even though this does not have wireless charging, I honestly don't mind. I plug my phone in sometime around the middle of the day if I feel like topping it off, and it charges it up real fast. I'll forget about it and oh, it's at 100%. Another thing that's really exciting about their charging standard is that you can use the phone while it's charging and it doesn't slow down the charging. If I picked up the Galaxy S10 Plus here and started using it while it was charging, it's going to slow significantly with its charging speed. Now taking a peek underneath the hood here, we have the Snapdragon 855 SoC. I've got 12 gigabytes of RAM on my model and 256 gigabytes of internal storage. I believe this comes in a 6 and 8 gigabyte configuration alongside this 12. Now OnePlus does say that they've got RAM boost, which I have enabled here, and this is their algorithm. They say it intelligently allocates RAM when needed, as learned by your usage patterns, and enables more applications to stay open in the background without slowing down overall performance. I've been using this for such a short period of time that it's really hard to say how this benefits me, but I'm not expecting to run into RAM issues anytime soon. Above 6 gigabytes is just fine. More than that seems even overkill. 12 seems overkill to me. 8, fine. We'll call that the sweet spot. So far, this has been a very smooth, quick, responsive, well-performing phone. I've truly got no complaints. Seeing how it does in intensive games like Gear.Club, this is underneath Game Bench, just looking at the frame rates, it's performing very similar to the Galaxy S10 Plus. On such an intensive game, it's really hanging around that 60 frames per second, kind of going down, dipping around 55. So it does really quite well, and they also say that it's got a liquid cooling system to it, which they call a 10-layer liquid cooling system. So I don't foresee anybody having issues in the gaming department. Now lastly for performance, let's talk about the UFS 3.0 storage. We have UFS 2.1 storage on the Galaxy S10 Plus, and actually UFS 3.0 made it into the Galaxy Fold, but it didn't get into this one here. So this has UFS 3.0 storage, and it does make a difference for I/O, so read and write speeds. And if you're opening up games, reading assets from storage, this is also faster. So no doubt about it, this is an incredibly well-performing phone. Now some last little things that I really like about this phone. Underneath utilities here, you can see scheduled power off. Now this isn't new. We have this on the OnePlus 6T as well underneath utilities. So what I can do with this is I can tell the phone to turn off at nighttime. Just say scheduled at 12 in the morning and it won't turn back on till 7 a.m. I just like this. I don't want to leave my phone on all the time. And also it saves some battery during the nighttime, although this charges so quickly that it's kind of a wash. But still, that's nice. It powers down, and then it's ready and up right when I need it to be in the morning. We've also got a gaming mode to optimize your gaming experience. There's some enhancement settings, some haptic feedback settings. We've got our reading mode, which I really use under Kindle a lot. Just turns everything to grayscale. We've got Zen mode, which I think is quite clever, and I've had quite a fun time with it. So it allows you to take a 20-minute break away from your phone if you hit Let's Go. It's going to tell you some need-to-know things. It can't be canceled once it's started, and I learned this the hard way. It doesn't matter even if you turn the phone off and turn it back on. It knows better. It's going to resume right back where it was in the countdown. So once you set this, you're locked out of your phone for 20 minutes. So you can make some calls and you can use the camera. But otherwise, you are locked out. Don't play with this. We've also got a new screen recording mode, which I think is really quite neat. It allows you to record anything that's on your screen. So it doesn't matter the application that you're using, it's going to record what's on the screen, it's going to record the audio that's coming from the phone, and also it will record external audio as well. And of course you got some settings such as resolution, bitrate, your audio source, and so on and so forth. Content creation to the max, right? And then lastly we have the night mode. So the night mode works as a blue cut filter, and now we're able to get it to go a lot dimmer at nighttime. So it makes the screen nice and warm, and it's really dim. It's hard to see. So we've got Oxygen OS. This is Android 9.0. This is a full-featured Very premium phone. What are we missing? So we don't have wireless charging. There isn't an IP rating, although there's probably some water resistance. And there's no headphone jack. I still feel that where they're lacking is in the camera department. I think the main camera does a pretty good job. I think it could do a little bit better with dynamic range. The wide-angle camera is just not cutting it for me, but I absolutely love this telephoto camera. But the screen is absolutely gorgeous on this thing. It's a really beautiful phone, feels great in the hand. It's got quite a bit of heft to it. It's actually quite a big phone overall. I'm sure this is more akin to the size of the Galaxy S10 5G. Next to the S10 Plus, it actually looks quite big. An all-out media phone from OnePlus that charges very quickly, lasts all day, has a fantastic screen, and comes in at a price point, although I'm not quite sure what it will be just yet, less than what you have with the Galaxy S10s and the iPhones of the world. But so far, I love this, and with no notch and having that huge immersive screen, this is going to stay in my pocket for probably quite some time. So let me know what you guys think about this phone. This has been Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if this is going to be your next phone and which configuration you would go for. I definitely give it a thumbs up. Thank you to OnePlus for sending this over for me to look at, and have a good night, you guys.